It was supposed to be a routine day for Officer Daniels and Officer Reed of the Willow Creek Police Department. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban streets. The call came through just as they were finishing their coffee break, a report of a suspicious individual loitering near a high-end jewelry store downtown. The description was vague. A tall black man wearing a hoodie, pacing near the storefront. When they arrived at the scene, Daniels and Reed spotted the man almost immediately. He wasn't doing anything illegal, just standing there, looking at his phone, but the officers exchanged a glance. Something about him seemed out of place in this part of town. They stepped out of their patrol car, their badges catching the sunlight, and approached him. "Excuse me, sir. Can we have a word with you?" Daniels asked, his voice firm, but polite. The man looked up, startled. His eyes flicked between the officers, then to the jewelry store behind him. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone calm but wary. Reed stepped closer. "We got a call about someone matching your description. Can you tell us what you're doing here?" The man sighed, putting his phone in his pocket. "I'm waiting for someone," he said simply. But the officers weren't satisfied. To them, his answers felt evasive, his demeanor too casual. The tension grew as they asked more questions, and soon the situation escalated. When the man hesitated to provide identification, Daniels moved to detain him. "You're under arrest," Daniels said, pulling out his handcuffs. "For what?" the man demanded, his voice rising. "I haven't done anything wrong." A small crowd began to gather as the man was cuffed and placed into the back of the patrol car. Some people recorded the arrest on their phones, murmuring among themselves about whether the officers had overstepped. At the station, the man remained composed, even as the officers pressed him with questions. He refused to say much beyond his name, Marcus. No last name, no address. His calm confidence unnerved them. The next morning, Marcus was brought before the court. The small courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as people speculated about who he was and what had happened. The arrest had quickly gone viral, with hashtags and heated debates flooding social media. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Marcus stood at the defendant's table, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor laid out the charges, and just as the judge was about to ask Marcus to speak, his lawyer, a sharp, well-dressed woman who seemed to appear out of nowhere, rose to her feet. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but commanding, "before we proceed, there's something about my client that everyone here needs to know." The courtroom held its breath. Even the judge looked intrigued. Marcus leaned forward, a faint smile playing on his lips as his lawyer turned to the room. What she said next would change everything. The room seemed to freeze, every eye locked on Marcus and his lawyer. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people leaned in, desperate to hear what was about to be revealed. Marcus remained calm, his hands resting lightly on the table in front of him, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. The judge raised an eyebrow, his gavel resting beside him, ready to restore order if needed. "Your Honor," the lawyer began again, her voice cutting through the tension. "My client's identity is not what it appears to be. And before this court proceeds any further, it is critical to understand who he truly is." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The judge motioned for her to continue. "Miss Carter, you're being rather cryptic. If there's something relevant to this case, I suggest you get to the point." The lawyer nodded, her sharp gaze sweeping the courtroom. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the point is that my client's presence here goes beyond the circumstances of his arrest. His identity carries implications that will not only affect this trial, but also how we view justice itself in this city." The murmurs grew louder, and the judge rapped his gavel once. "Order. Miss Carter, I'll give you a moment to clarify, but keep in mind this court is not a platform for theatrics." Meanwhile, Marcus sat silent, his eyes scanning the room. He seemed to be studying the faces of those who had gathered. He noticed the reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads, the police officers sitting stiffly in the back, and the diverse crowd of onlookers, some of whom had come out of curiosity, others to demand accountability. Miss Carter stepped closer to the judge's bench, lowering her voice slightly but ensuring everyone in the room could still hear. Your Honor, my client is not just an ordinary man accused of loitering. He is someone of extraordinary significance, someone whose identity has been deliberately concealed for reasons that will soon become clear. The judge frowned. Miss Carter, this is highly irregular. If you have evidence to present, I suggest you do so now. She gave a small nod, then turned to Marcus, who finally spoke for the first time since entering the courtroom. His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable authority. May I address the court, Your Honor? The judge hesitated, then gestured for him to proceed. You may, but I remind you, Mr. Marcus, that anything you say can be used against you. Marcus smiled faintly, as though the warning didn't concern him. He rose to his feet, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the reminder, but I'm quite familiar with how the system works. His words sparked another wave of whispers. Was he a lawyer? A former judge? The mystery deepened with every passing second. He turned to face the courtroom, his gaze steady and unflinching. I know many of you are wondering who I am and why I'm here. And while I can't give you all the answers right now, I can promise this. By the time this case is over, the truth will come to light. The courtroom buzzed with speculation, but the judge's gavel quickly silenced it again. Mr. Marcus, we're not here for speeches. If there's something concrete you'd like to share, now is the time. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. I understand, Your Honor. But before I say anything further, I must ensure my safety and the safety of those involved. What I'm about to reveal will have consequences far beyond this courtroom. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued despite himself. And you expect us to wait for these revelations at your convenience? Marcus didn't flinch. I expect you to understand that the truth is worth the wait. The tension in the room was palpable, and even Miss Carter seemed momentarily unsure of what her client would say next. But Marcus merely sat back down, his silence as unsettling as his words. As the proceedings continued, the story began to unfold in fragments. Miss Carter laid out a series of cryptic details about Marcus' background, each one adding another layer to the mystery. He wasn't from Willow Creek, that much was clear. But where he was from, and why he had come to this town, remained unanswered. The prosecutor, clearly frustrated, tried to redirect the focus back to the charges. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a simple case of loitering and resisting arrest. The defense's attempt to turn it into something larger is irrelevant and a waste of the court's time. But Miss Carter was prepared. Irrelevant. My client was arrested without cause, detained without evidence, and subjected to a level of scrutiny that raises serious questions about bias and misconduct. And now that we're here, this court has an obligation to hear the full story. The prosecutor scoffed. And what story is that? That your client is some kind of secret agent? A misunderstood hero? Please, spare us the drama. Marcus didn't react to the jab. Instead, he leaned over to whisper something to Miss Carter, who nodded and addressed the court again. Your Honor, my client's identity is not a matter of speculation. It's a matter of record. And when that record is revealed, it will become clear why this case cannot proceed as it stands. The judge sighed, clearly torn between his impatience and his curiosity. Miss Carter, you're testing my patience. If there's evidence to support your claims, present it. Otherwise, I'm inclined to move forward with the charges. Before Miss Carter could respond, a door at the back of the courtroom opened, and a man in a sharp black suit walked in. He carried a briefcase and moved with an air of authority that immediately drew everyone's attention. He approached the defense table and handed Miss Carter a folder, whispering something in her ear. Her expression shifted as she reviewed the contents. She stood once more, her voice steadier than ever. Your Honor, I've just received documentation that will shed light on my client's true identity. With your permission, I'd like to submit it into evidence. The judge motioned for the bailiff to retrieve the folder. As the documents were passed around, The courtroom held its collective breath. The judge's eyes widened slightly as he read the first page, then the second. He looked up at Marcus, who sat perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. The prosecutor, now visibly uneasy, leaned over to try to catch a glimpse of the papers. "What is this?" he demanded. The judge ignored him, addressing Miss Carter instead. "Miss Carter, is this authentic?" She nodded. "It is, Your Honor, verified by multiple sources." The judge looked at Marcus again, his expression a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Finally, he turned to the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears this case is far more complicated than we initially thought." The room erupted into chaos, whispers, gasps, and the frantic clicking of reporters' cameras. But Marcus didn't say a word. He simply leaned back in his chair, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. What was in those documents? And who was this man who had turned a simple arrest into a national spectacle? The answers were coming, but for now, the mystery remained. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the judge tried to restore order. Quiet, quiet in the courtroom. He barked, slamming the gavel down with force. Slowly, the murmurs subsided, but the atmosphere remained electric. Everyone was on edge, eager to know what had been revealed in those mysterious documents. Marcus sat silently, his demeanor unchanged, as if he had anticipated this exact reaction. The prosecutor stood, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, I think we all deserve to know what's in that folder. If the defense is going to introduce evidence that completely shifts the focus of this trial, it needs to be made public." The judge hesitated, glancing between the defense table and the prosecutor. Then, with a measured tone, he responded, "I'll allow it, but only after I've reviewed it thoroughly. Until then, this court will not devolve into a spectacle." The prosecutor clenched his jaw, but sat down without further objection. The judge turned to Ms. Carter. "Proceed with your next point, but be mindful of the boundaries of this courtroom." Miss Carter nodded, her confidence unshaken. She turned to the jury, her voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client's life has been anything but ordinary. What you see before you is a man who has endured unimaginable challenges, someone whose experiences will change the way you view this case, and perhaps even this system." A ripple of curiosity spread through the room. Miss Carter continued, "But before we get to that, let's address the events leading up to his arrest. My client wasn't loitering. He was waiting for a meeting that could have significant implications for many people in this very city." The prosecutor leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "And who, exactly, was he meeting?" Miss Carter smirked slightly. "We'll get to that, but for now, let's focus on the actions of the officers. They approached my client without any evidence of wrongdoing, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and then detained him without probable cause. This isn't just about Marcus. It's about a pattern of behavior that we cannot ignore." At the back of the courtroom, one of the officers involved in the arrest shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Daniels glanced at Reed, who avoided his gaze. Both men knew the arrest hadn't been as clean as they claimed in their report. Meanwhile, Marcus's calm demeanor was starting to unnerve everyone. Reporters whispered among themselves, speculating about his background. Was he some sort of whistleblower? A government operative? Theories ran wild, but no one could piece together the truth. Outside the courtroom, the story was spreading like wildfire. The hashtags #VoiceMarcus and #JusticeForMarcus were trending across social media. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, their signs demanding accountability and transparency. News vans lined the streets, reporters delivering live updates to an audience hungry for answers. Inside, the prosecutor tried to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, this is starting to sound like a conspiracy theory. The defense is making vague claims without presenting any concrete evidence. We're here to determine whether the defendant was loitering and resisting arrest, not to speculate about his past." Miss Carter didn't flinch. "The prosecution is eager to keep this case as narrow as possible, because they know the truth will expose a much larger issue. My client's arrest wasn't just an isolated incident. It was the result of systemic bias and a failure to follow due process. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. Miss Carter, if you have evidence to support these claims, I suggest you present it sooner rather than later. She nodded. I will, Your Honor. But first, I'd like to call a witness. This caught everyone off guard. The prosecutor frowned. A witness? Who? Miss Carter's lips curved into a knowing smile. Someone who was present at the time of the arrest, someone who can shed light on what really happened. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a young woman walked in, her head held high. She was dressed professionally, but her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. As she approached the stand, Marcus's gaze followed her, a faint flicker of recognition passing over his face. The bailiff swore her in, and Miss Carter wasted no time. Please state your name for the record. The woman cleared her throat. My name is Erica Johnson. And Ms. Johnson, where were you on the afternoon of my client's arrest? I was at the jewelry store, she replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. I work there. Miss Carter nodded. And did you see my client outside the store that day? Yes, Erica said. He was standing near the entrance, looking at his phone. At first, I thought he might be waiting for someone. And did you find his behavior suspicious? Erica hesitated, glancing briefly at Marcus before answering. No, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't try to come into the store or bother anyone. He just waited. Miss Carter stepped closer. And did you see the officers when they arrived? Yes, Erica said. They pulled up in their patrol car and got out. I watched from the window as they approached him. And what happened next? They started asking him questions. At first, it seemed routine, but then things got heated. I couldn't hear everything, but I could tell he was trying to stay calm while they kept pressing him. It didn't look like he was resisting, though. It looked like they were escalating things. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor, speculation. The judge waved him off. Sustained. Miss Carter, keep your questions focused on what the witness observed, not her interpretations. Miss Carter nodded. Of course, Your Honor. Miss Johnson, did you film any part of the interaction? Erica nodded slowly. Yes. When I saw things starting to escalate, I pulled out my phone and recorded it. I thought it might be important later. The courtroom buzzed again, and the judge rapped his gavel. Do you have this recording with you? Yes, Erica said, reaching into her bag. She handed her phone to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. As the judge reviewed the footage, the tension in the room was unbearable. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. This recording will be entered into evidence. Miss Carter, you may proceed. Miss Carter smiled faintly, her confidence growing. Thank you, Your Honor. For now, I have no further questions for the witness. The prosecutor looked furious as he stood to cross-examine Erica. But Marcus didn't seem concerned. He sat back in his chair, his gaze steady, as if he already knew how this would unfold. The courtroom was on edge, the mystery deepening with every passing moment. Who was Marcus, really? And why did it feel like this case was just the beginning of something much larger?